Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Shreya Dhondial. As we speak, 700 Indian students who have been stranded in a bomb shelter in Sumy for the last 13 days are making their way to safety. It's a fourth attempt at a localized ceasefire in Ukraine, and so far the good news is that it is holding. But it came too late for 22 people who were killed as Russian forces bombed a residential building in Sumy. Of those 22, 2 were children. As Ukrainian cities and towns are pounded by the Russian artillery and the West imposes sanction after sanction on Moscow, the war is beginning to impact India as well. For one, now that elections are over, brace for petrol prices to go up. The Russia-Ukraine war has pushed global oil prices to a 14-year high, and Mr. Putin is warning that worse is to come if a ban comes on Russia's oil. Then there is India's defense sector, heavily dependent on Russian imports, as you know, that is now staring at supply disruptions and the question, how will we pay the Russians for their spares and services and equipment, given that Russian banks have been cut off from the global financial ecosystem? But there is a silver lining for India's wheat exports as the war rages on. The India impact is your debrief this evening. Let's start by taking a close look at what a war 5,000 kilometers away is doing to India's economy.
A war being waged thousands of miles away can trigger a domino effect that deeply impacts your wallet. Not convinced? We'll tell you how. Crude oil prices have doubled up to $140, up from $70 in December. Putin's invasion has sent the oil economy into a tailspin as fears loom that the United States and Europe may stop purchasing oil as part of their retaliation to choke the Russian economy. Russia, after all, is the world's largest oil producer. There's mounting panic back home as India exports 84% of its oil. The oil spike and a resulting inflation will most likely deal a blow to the already sluggish Indian economy, trying hard to soften the impact of the pandemic. High inflation can stall growth, spur unemployment, and widen current account deficits. On Monday alone, stock markets crashed 2.74%. The Sensex has fallen by 7.5% since February 24th. The rupee has fallen to an all-time low against the dollar, hovering around the 77 mark. Disillusioned by market volatility, more and more investors are moving towards gold. MCX gold gained nearly 2%. Global prices are touching $2,000 an ounce. The war has severely hampered trade from the Black Sea ports, driving up the global benchmark wheat prices by 40% and further pushing global food inflation. Supply disruptions from Russia and Ukraine, which together account for 30% of the world's wheat exports and 20% of corn exports, are set to hit hard millions of people. But there's also a silver lining. The war has created an opportunity for India's wheat exports in the international market. Total shipments from India have already touched a record of 6.6 million tons this fiscal. And traders in Asia's largest wheat mandi in Khanni in Punjab are looking to harvest from the instability in Russia and Ukraine.
किसान हमारा गरीब है, वो कर्ज में फंसा हुआ, वो इसका फायदा नहीं उठा सकेगा।
ये बात चलेगी तो हमें को जो 4 पैसे मिलेंगे तो जिम्मेदार है उसका फायदा होगा, उसका जो गेहूं है ऊंचे भाव में बिकेगा।
Ukraine and Russia together account for a sizable chunk of the world's wheat supply. With this now in jeopardy, there's a market for India to benefit from. As they say, in adversity lies opportunity. With NC Satpathy and Pallavi Ghosh, Ritangshu Bhattacharya for CNN News 18.
In adversity, there is opportunity. For India, also an opportunity to take a close, hard look at our dependency on Russia for arms and ammunition. Now, nearly 85% of India's weapons are of Russian origin. Despite cutting down on our arms imports from Russia by 50%, Moscow still remains our largest supplier. The ongoing war throws up a concern and a dilemma for India. Concern about whether Russia will be in a position to complete the S-400 order and deliver the nuclear submarines that we are leasing from them, and if this can happen on time. The dilemma is, how does India pay the Russians for the spares and services and weapons, given that Russian banks have been cut off the global financial system? Take a look.
As the war in Ukraine rages on, concerns are mounting in India. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh chaired a high-level meet with the tri-service chiefs to assess how the conflict would impact India's preparedness, given that Russia is India's largest supplier of weapons and spares. Nearly 86% of India's weapons are of Russian origin. A bulk of the Air Force's fighter fleet, several Indian Navy platforms, including the lone aircraft carrier INS Vikramaditya, and almost all tanks the army operates are Russian. In the last 20 years, Russia has accounted for 66.5% of India's arms import. Russia's share in Indian arms import was down to about 50% between 2016 and 2020, but it still remained the largest single supplier of arms to India. The most significant deal which is being threatened by this current crisis is the purchase of 5 state-of-the-art S-400 Triumph air defense systems. India placed an order for 5 units costing around $5 billion in 2018. The first unit was delivered in December 2021 and has been deployed at an Indian Air Force base in Punjab. There's also a joint venture to manufacture around 6 lakh AK-203 rifles at a factory in Amethi. India has also signed a deal worth $950 million in 2018 to procure 4 Talwar-class stealth frigates for the Navy. India is also in talks with Russia to lease 2 nuclear ballistic submarines, Chakra 3 and Chakra 4, the first of which is expected to be delivered by 2025. Also in line, 33 fighters, MiG-29 and Sukhois. Will Russia be able to deliver, given that their defense industry will need to replenish Russian forces on top priority? But the biggest blow will perhaps be to India's missile program. The BrahMos is a joint venture between India's DRDO and Russian NPOM. Sanctions could jeopardize India's recent $375 million BrahMos cruise missile export contract with the Philippines. Other countries like Indonesia, Thailand and Vietnam have also shown interest in the missile. Will Western sanctions see these possible contracts melt away? Following the sanction, Indian banks are reluctant to process even scheduled payments to Russian firms. Going forward, the concern is about how payments will be made to Russia in exchange for its goods, spares and services, given that Russia has been cut off from the global financial system. The war in Ukraine, a reminder on why India needs to be Atmanirbhar in defense. It's a long way off, but a start has been made. Natasha Menden for CNN News 18.
Meanwhile, as the war enters its 3rd week, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is only growing. 20 lakh people have been forced to flee their country that is being flattened in the Russian onslaught that has been ongoing for 13 days. The aftermath of this war has been painfully felt by innocent civilians. Many are now without food, water or electricity. Moscow, of course, is denying deliberately targeting civilians, but scenes across Ukraine are challenging that claim almost on a daily basis. Matthew Chance is sending us this report.
Clearing up the broken debris of a shattered home. This the devastation caused by a Russian attack on a residential neighborhood in a small Ukrainian town. Bielorusskva, 50 miles south of the Ukrainian capital, is nowhere near the front lines. But it has felt the rage and the pain of this war. All right, well, we've come inside one of the houses that was affected by what was apparently random artillery or rocket fire into this residential neighbourhood, and you can see just how shattered the lives of the family here were. Look, I mean, the windows have all been blown out, obviously. All their belongings have been left behind as they've sort of gone into hiding. There's a picture up there of what it seemed to be some of the people who lived in here. It was a family with some children. Apparently, they've survived this, which is good. But of course, when you look at the situation and the way that Russians have been shelling residential areas across the country, so many people haven't survived. This is interesting. Come have a look. It's the children's bedroom. You can see over here. Look, the bunk beds. The roof that's fallen down onto the top of them when that shell hit. And of course, in the panic and in the evacuation, the kids have left all their toys up here. You know, and it just shows you that no matter where you are in this country, with Russia attacking towns and cities across it, you know, lives are being shattered. Svetoslav is a close friend of the family who were nearly killed in their beds here. Godfather to the 3 children who escaped with their lives. Now he has one request, he tells me, for the United States. Please close the skies over Ukraine, he begs. If we can just contact NATO and ask them this, everything will be fine. Otherwise, he warns, Putin will cross Ukraine and threaten the whole of Europe. In a bunker under the town, its terrified children are singing Ukraine's national anthem. It keeps them calm. And as Russia invades, a whole generation of Ukrainians is being united by this war, together as they shelter from the horrors above.
Look back at history and you'll see that women are amongst those who are most impacted by a conflict or a war. They become vulnerable to gender-based violence. Many women in Ukraine have left the war zone, but some have chosen to stay back. They say they have no choice but to support their loved ones who have gone to the front. CNN's Anderson Cooper speaking to some of them in Lviv.
In a volunteer center in Lviv, moms whose husbands and children have taken up arms gather supplies for those fighting further east.
We understand we need to hold strong, like a fist, like this, and we have very strong faith. We believe that we will win, and this will hold us together.
Irina works for a group called Angel on Your Shoulder. She's recruited more than 100 women to pack boxes around the clock.
Non-stop.
Everything is donated, medicine and toiletries, all kinds of prepackaged food.
They're looking for things which are easy to prepare, which you can just add water to for troops at the front or families.
Nothing stays here for long. The work is hard, the war is harder. Angela's husband left for the front yesterday.
My husband, yesterday.
He's a doctor, a veteran of the Soviet war in Afghanistan.
Does it help to work here, to stay busy?
Але якщо на нашу землю наступають,
We are doing what we can. We keep on praying. People ask how you are not crying, but you know crying doesn't help. Each person does what they can.
Angela is in the reserves as well, but for now she's taking care of her family and volunteering.
Thank you for your strength. You give me and everybody strength.
дякую вам велике.
Thank you very much.
In another building, more mothers, more volunteers, making camouflage netting to hide tanks and artillery.
Я вас навчу.
Let me teach you. Do you see? Just like this.
Alina's son is already in the fight.
What made you want to come here?
Берегти країну нашу.
We need to protect our country. It is difficult to speak. My son is in the army since 2015. I didn't want to let him go, and he said, "Who will go if not me? How will I be able to say to people that I hid and shelter?" So he left, and it was extremely difficult for me.
Many in this room have had to flee their homes in Kharkiv and Kyiv. They wonder when the bombs will fall here.
If you could talk to mothers in Russia, what would you tell them?
Сказала, щоб вони забрали своїх синів.
I would tell them to take their sons back. We are also sorry for them. They are also humans. Human life was created by God. How can it be taken away just like that? They will be judged and face punishment for this. You cannot do this. Let them take their kids.
This war has many fronts, and for mothers, there are many ways to fight.
I'm going straight across to Atika Schubert, who is joining us live from Lviv. Atika, thank you very much for your time here on Debrief. Let me start by asking you, by the looks of it, of what we are hearing here in India, the localized ceasefire in Ukraine seems to be holding. It seems that people are in a position to evacuate via the humanitarian corridors. If you could just tell us about the situation on that front, and if what happens today, if the ceasefire holds, will it in any way reflect on the talks that the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Russia are going to have in Turkey on Thursday?
Well, there is some good news in that the one humanitarian corridor that has been opened from the northeastern town of Sumy, it has been working so far. The temporary ceasefire in that area has been holding, and that they have been able to evacuate thousands of residents from Sumy, including several hundred Indian students, I understand. So that's good news. From they're being evacuated to central Ukraine, and they will be able to move west, where it's much safer and more secure. Now, it's still ongoing, the evacuation, but if it succeeds, there is hope that this could mean they will broaden out the temporary ceasefires to more towns and more cities that are in desperate need. So many areas now, tens of thousands of people in the country have been cut off from power, from water. They're running out of food and other supplies. In some cities, they've been collecting rainwater to survive. So it is very grim, very desperate in some areas. And unfortunately, in other areas where a temporary ceasefire has been tried, such as in Mariupol, emergency aid has come under fire even as it's tried to reach the city. So there's a desperate need for these temporary ceasefires to work. Hopefully, we'll be able to see a successful conclusion to the evacuation of Sumy today. If that happens, we might see a further broadening out, but we'll have to see where it goes from the next round of negotiations.
Okay. Atika, finally, reports are coming in that President Biden is expected to ban Russian oil imports to the US. Are other European countries likely to follow? I ask you this because there will be a very heavy price to pay for that.
Oh, a tremendous price to pay for consumers, certainly. The U.S. may find it easier to break away from Russian oil and gas. It's not as heavily reliant on it for its energy needs. And the U.S. has already been exploring other ways to replace that, talking, for example, to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. So that may be why U.S. President Joe Biden is willing to go ahead with this. The EU, on the other hand, is very heavily reliant on Russia for its energy. Already, it relies on about 40% of its supply on Russian natural gas. And Germany, the largest economy, relies on more than half of its natural gas needs from Russia. So it would be much more difficult for the EU to break away. I should point out, however, that Russia has already threatened to cut off the gas supply to Europe if there is a ban on Russian oil and gas. So I think we could see an escalating tit-for-tat economic war also developing on side. So it's going to be tough for the consumer, certainly, but this is the price to pay, they say, for cutting off reliance and dependence on Russian oil and gas.
Atika, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Today, India is breathing a sigh of relief as the last batch of Indian students in Ukraine are moving to safety. But there is one who has chosen to stay back, an engineering student from Coimbatore who has now gone ahead and joined Ukraine's volunteer army. Take a look.
From the hot and humid climes of Coimbatore to the heat and dust of battle in Kharkiv, the contrast couldn't have been more drastic for Sanikesh Ravichandran. But for reasons still known entirely to him alone, this 21-year-old engineering student from Tamil Nadu has decided to take up arms to fight Russia in Ukraine. It seems Sanikesh always had dreams of being a Rambo. His room had posters of soldiers plastered across a wall. As a boy, he dreamed of joining the Indian Army. But adulthood saw his hopes being shattered as he was rejected twice for his height. Disappointed, Sanikesh decided to become an engineer and enrolled in the National Aerospace University in Kharkiv in September 2018. 3 years later, war struck. Like thousands of Indians stranded in Ukraine, Sanikesh's family lost contact with him and began to fear the worst. But then they received news which they could hardly believe. Media reports had begun to circulate that an Indian youth from Tamil Nadu had joined the Ukrainian forces. A shocked family wrote to the Indian embassy there, which sought more details. Intelligence sleuths visited his home in Coimbatore for more details and were able to track him down as a volunteer of the Georgian National Legion paramilitary unit. Relieved as his family was to know that he is safe, they are equally distraught as the 21-year-old insists that he will continue to fight for Ukraine and has no plans of returning home. For years, Sanikesh wanted to be a Sainik. But it seems that in a war that has shattered a million others, one dream at least has been realized in Ukraine. Atika Schubert for CNN News 18.
And finally, we are hearing from Ukrainian President Zelensky as well, who is now denouncing unkept promises by the West, saying that the responsibility for the casualties from Russia's ongoing invasion rests also on those who were not capable of taking a decision in the West for 13 days. He's saying this is genocide that is currently underway, speaking once again and talking once again about the no-fly zone that President Zelensky wants NATO to impose over its skies. So far, NATO and the West have refused/declined to do so because it effectively will mean that NATO then enters the war, which will of course escalate the entire situation. With that, it's a wrap from me. Thanks for watching.